I think there are 5 W's that you should go through as a form of checklist as to where and what type of property you want to buy. I think perhaps the easy example is to look at housing, and I always like to propound this 5 W's. One is where, the first W. The second one is who. Next is which. The fourth is what, and the fifth is the wow factor. So in terms of where, people talk about this as being location. But I have seen properties been developed in very good location, but yet it's been left abandoned and uncompleted. So when you pick where, whilst it's important to look at the second W, which is who. Who meaning who's the developer. Now, very often time you may have a very good parcel of land, but some very inexperienced and probably a very weak developer in terms of financial standing develops it, but because sales is not so good, particularly over maybe a recessionary period, he can't complete. So your money is stuck there and the project is abandoned. So that's the second W. The third W is which. This will relate to the pricing, the price point. So please, if you have only a budget of say 100,000 ringgit, don't expect this to be developed in a location which is maybe, if you like, zone A of Kuala Lumpur. But even within that, you can still apply the 5 W's to select your property. The next is the fourth W, which is when. So this is timing, something my good friend Ho Chin Sin Soon talks about. It's really trying to pick the time, when's the best time to buy. This is projection or prediction is probably as good as a weatherman. But there are some things you may need to look at. Perhaps if you see the stock market start to go up in the uptrend, you can bet your last dollar that 6 months, 12 months later, all this profit from the stock market will translate into brick and mortar. So that's one area of looking at a good timing. It's obviously looking at the economic growth, what's the GDP growth of the country, but also fundamentally, one should also look at our population growth. And we have a very healthy population growth of 2.2 to 2.4%. So that's your demand, but you also have supply. Now, you can check that supply from the Ministry of Housing, from the various sources, maybe from FOMCA, maybe from REHDA. And currently, as far as I'm aware, the average amount of supply into market is something like 100,000 units per annum, when the true demand is probably between 150 to 180,000. So you can see that shortfall happening in the last 3 or 4 years, and this deficit will be carried forward, where suddenly one day all those people who didn't buy will suddenly decide to join the queue, and that's when a possibility of pricing going up again. The fifth one, which is probably a lesser used W, would be the wow factor, right? Even in some so-called areas which are not that fantastic. For instance, I can think 2 places: the mines, even Sunway Pyramid area. When you look in the past 20 years ago, it was a disused mining mine. Nobody would think it can be rehabilitated, right? And today, the wow factor, which is put in by Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia and also Tan Sri Lee Kim Yew, in fact, it was ahead of time. People now look at those places as really something very desired. That's closer to home, albeit in the Klang Valley, which probably you cannot go wrong. But if you take it further afield, you do have the wow factor happening in places like perhaps Jandabai, also as far away as in Langkawi, the place called Datai. Those gives you the wow factor, and you want to own it. It's sometimes maybe nothing to do with investment return. It is just that the project is so nicely done. It's a trophy investment that you want. So that's the fifth called the wow factor. Developers, there are quite many in Malaysia. Firstly, perhaps you would want to see whether he's a member of REHDA. REHDA was the NGO and the association which has got hasn't got the powers of professional institution where we can bar people from coming in, or you must meet disqualification, debt paper qualification. Essentially, REHDA accepts members who has got the approval for the project, has got minimally some financial standing, and needs to be recommended by at least another 2 developers before we become a member. We have also taken steps where people, where our members who do not follow the rules have been terminated the membership. So there is some corporate governance with respect to being a REHDA member as opposed to one who is not. All right. Aside from that, I think it's important, as you would perhaps in a marriage, you want to check the background of the family, who are the friends, who they associate with. So similarly, a developer, you start off by perhaps looking at the balance sheet, look at the track record. Someone who has been around for 30 years, right, obviously has got a fairly good report card in his history. But sometimes changes in CEO, changes of control may also change the nature and the trust in that company. So track record is good, but also look at who is in the management, right? And sometimes also you would have friends who may be in the banking industry, maybe in the accounting firms. You can also cross-check, because sometimes these people do give you quite good cross references. Another help perhaps is there are about 90 public listed property companies in Malaysia. So in general, you don't get a listing unless you have certain minimum standards and certain minimum financial achievement. So that also helps. Don't be afraid also, of course, to call the Ministry of Housing and Local Government to see whether the person has got blocked in his track record, or even REHDA Secretariat. If they are very reserved in the comments, you may want to drill down further and see whether there's a problem or impending problem. So I guess that's some of the telltale signs that you want to look for in respect of who you want to pick. Fundamentally, property, in terms other than satisfying the emotional need of a house, of a roof over your head, so that your barren self, it's hidden from the public, is also something which people like to invest. It's a different asset class, right? Other from investing in the business and stocks and share, property globally has been deemed as a very safe and very good investment. Okay, the recent events in the United States does not seem to bear true, but there's a different set of problem. Instead of buying property, people are actually buying a derivative, a product, which not many people understand. But if purely going into investment in property, I think fundamentally you want to look at, apart from the fact that the building should be there, should be well built, should be trendy, should be something which meets the needs of universally of anyone who wants a home. Fundamentally, property investment comes from the yield point of view. If you have got a good yield, right, then the capital values will reflect the yield. If there's no yield, it's probably not worth that much money, because you're only talking about replacement cost. Okay, so yield becomes a very important element in assessing whether it's a good investment. So a benchmark that you can probably follow is if your if your fixed deposit in the bank is say 3.2%, all right. The question then is, if you will buy a property, all right, you get 5% yield. So you get a positive carry of 1.8%, and that's regular. You get it monthly if it's rented out, as opposed to perhaps fixed deposit, sometimes only at the end of 3 months, if you continue, or 6 months. In fact, 3.2% today is probably on 6 months term, whereas monthly rental is monthly. The other angle you want to look at is also what is the borrowing rate. So you've passed a fixed deposit benchmark. If you borrow at today's rate of 4.2%, okay, roughly 4.1, 4.2%, you're getting 5% yield. there is what you call a positive carry. All right, that's quite a good investment, because essentially what you're saying is that you get rental of 5%. All right, you are now paying your monthly mortgage at 4.2%. So some idiot is actually paying for your interest rate plus possibly even the capital. In 25 years you get paid off, you get regular income that pays off, and you still have 0.8, all right? Because 5 minus 3.2, sorry, 5 minus 4.2 is 0.8. You still have 0.8 to put in your pocket. In fact, your problem is a tax issue, because you still make a profit which you have to pay tax on. And you only tax deductible on the interest, but not on the principal repayment. So I would say these are some of the elements you look at in terms of whether property investment is a good investment. A little bit more complicated, but not much more complicated than if you were to invest in insurance products, in derivatives, and endowment policy, and so on and so forth. So I think brick and mortar, it's as I say, safe as houses.